based medical education, and to discuss competency and milestones that are important to learners who are interested in academic medicine. Next slide. So the title of this project is Designing Pre-Faculty Competencies for Diverse Medical Students and Residents. It's a project spearheaded by BINGAP, but has been generously supported with a president's grant from the Josiah Macy Jr. Foundation. In the audience today is Dana Levinson, who's Chief Program Officer from the Macy Foundation. So before I go any further, Dana, since I know you're on the call, if you'd like to say a word or say hello from the Macy Foundation, please do.
Oh, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been aware of BINGAP ever since I was at the University of Chicago at the Pritzker School of Medicine. So it was a real delight to see an application from this organization, and we're very happy to be part of supporting your work. I'm looking forward to getting a preview of the progress report, I guess.
Great, thank you. So the purpose of this project is to define competencies and then corresponding milestones to help measure progress towards those competencies for diverse medical students and residents, so that they may successfully enter a career in academic medicine. And we're going to talk somewhat about some process and some preliminary works out of this. But before that, I want to give a little background on some frames that really are sort of behind this project. Next slide. First, this is really foundational to the project. This is the National Center for Pre-Faculty Development definition of pre-faculty development, which is to provide trainees with foundational self-efficacy, knowledge, skills, and experiences to be successfully appointed and eventually promoted and tenured with an academic institution. And I think when it comes to competency-based education, I think the key words, for us, for this project, are things that will build self-efficacy, knowledge, and skills. And clearly, experiences are important as well. Next slide. The other framework that's really guiding this project is social cognitive career theory. If you're not familiar with this, this is a fairly common theory in the education literature as it relates to career choice, and it's been applied in many different disciplines, but it's been significantly applied both in medicine and other healthcare professions. And the gist of social cognitive career therapy is that as one decides what their career is going to be, there's many different inputs to that. One are their actual, the background that they come from and who they are. And again, that's important for our diverse learners. Their particular learning experiences, their expectations of whether they can actually achieve this, these outcome expectations, and then all these things in their context around them that could be either barriers or support to their decision to enter a chosen career. And so these things that are part of this framework have really guided what we've done for this project. Next slide. The other, framework for this project is the determinants of health framework, which is really used broadly in healthcare. If you look at what are the determinants of health for an individual who's in the center of their diagram, it obviously starts with, behavior, biology, and some physical things. But clearly, we all know there are social determinants of health. There are policies and interventions that determine those social determinants of health. And then there's issues of access to healthcare. And for those parts of this diagram, where this project fits in is that having a diverse healthcare workforce and having, a diverse faculty at our medical schools to produce that diverse healthcare workforce are really important when it comes to some of the social determinants of health, culturally competent uh, uh, discussions between providers and patients, and clearly, issues related to access that is culturally competent for everyone in the country. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Dickerson.
Great. Thank you, Ray. We're all on a first name basis. We've met many times, which we'll explain in a minute. But as was introduced, is this concept of competency-based medical education. This is the framework that we use to develop the specific competencies that we'll be discussing in detail, both in this session and then also at our breakout sessions later today. I think the number one goal that often gets overlooked is identification of abilities needed by learners. And our goal for this particular project was certainly not just to assure future academic faculty and hopefully leaders would enter academic medicine, but succeed and excel. And this was a great challenge that we were given. We simply don't want people to enter the program. We want them to excel and enjoy academic medicine. Once we identify those basic abilities, then we want to explicitly define what those are related to specific knowledge, skills, and behaviors that we want from the learners that participate in this educational process. As you will see, this gets into a more specific goal-oriented educational target that defines for the learner what is the specific outcome that we want. And this gets further divided into milestones so that we can actually measure how you're doing in the development of each particular competency. So again, I would like to reiterate, and you will see as when we get into the discussion, that our goal of developing these competencies was not only to help you enter academic medicine, but actually succeed and excel. The competencies that we identified still pertain to the faculty that are currently in programs. I've been in medical education for over 35 years, and when I review these competencies, I can see that in some areas, I'm still a novice. In some areas, I've become expert, but these competencies will serve you throughout your career in academic medicine. Could I have the next slide, please? The project overview, we established a working group of experts. We conducted focus groups, developed draft competencies and milestones, and then we went through a validation process, which we'll talk in more detail, and then we plan to disseminate the findings. The work group was a phenomenal group of individuals that worked very, very hard in identifying potential competencies, interviewing focus groups, and doing a significant literature search to truly identify those types of competencies that we feel will make you successful in a career of academic medicine. As we'll see shortly, success in academic medicine has many facets. It is not a well-developed residency or rotation that students can take. There are some academic residencies out there, but our challenge was really to identify those common competencies that should be considered as people enter and progress through their academic career. We spent many times on Zoom meetings. Individual groups were assigned to develop and refine competencies, and then we reviewed them as a group and developed our draft competencies that then went on to the next process, which Dr. Lee will discuss shortly. Could I have the next slide? This is the working group. Very engaged group of people, and when we talk about the development of the competencies, I think it is vital that these competencies were designed to promote diversity and success of our future faculty, which we want to be much more diverse. Unfortunately, academic and medicine in general has been slow in the uptake of diversity, and we need that diversity to deal with the emerging issues that are in our healthcare system right now, to make it better, to make it succeed, and be more accessible and cost effective. I want to thank everyone in this group. I'm somewhat of a novice working in competencies for pre-faculty, and many of these have served as mentors for me throughout this process.
Can I interject a comment here, Joel? Sorry.
Yes.
A question was asked earlier about how, residents could get involved in, bin gap activities. And I just want to point out that the working group, we were sort of a little deliberate in establishing it, but it includes sort of stakeholders across the spectrum. And so Ashley Rogers, whose name you see there, she was actually a medical student when she started on the working group. She's since started her internship in July. Pooja Guttari is a resident. Lindy Zhang is a fellow. So we really had the spectrum of folks both in the pipeline towards academic medicine and clearly already in academic medicine, in the working group. So, and as Joel said, it's been just an absolute pleasure working with these folks.
Well, thank you, Ray. And I think the other comment is, I think there has always been concern that will these competencies be teachable given the environment that varies between students, residency, and being active faculty? So getting that input in the development makes them quote unquote doable in a variety of educational environments, again, to promote your success. And as we will see, future goals are to develop educational materials that will allow people to participate and develop these milestones in many different forms, again, so that they can do so in their current educational or work environment. Can I have the next slide, please? The work came to develop a total of 12 competency domains. There were 7 foundational competencies: academic career choice and professional identity, mentoring, networking, financial skills, diversity, equity, and inclusion, personal effectiveness and self-efficacy, and leaderships. It is felt these foundational competencies are required for overall success in an academic career, regardless of the focus of that particular academic career. Then we identified 5 areas, what we consider focus areas, is as individuals enter an academic career, they often focus in 1 or 2 specific areas. And those were identified as providing education for students and residents, community engagement and advocacy, health policy, research, and clinical medicine. Could I have the next slide, please? So here's an example of a foundational competency, number 1, which is academic career choice and professional identity. That is the domain. Under there are several specific competencies listed. This is just one of those particular competency. Notice the focus is on the learner. So we want the learner to assess their own value and goals, and then that fit within their own academic career. Then there are milestones that are listed out. And as you look through these milestones, they are not simply there to get you into an academic career, but you will see in the advanced stage, you will evaluate and choose an appropriate faculty track, which for many current faculty is an active process once you've entered an academic career. Can I have the next slide, please? Here's example number 2. This is for the domain of mentoring. The focus is again on the leadership. So it's teaching the learner how to engage and utilize mentorship in their career in academic medicine. It is not to become a mentor, it is to recognize the importance of mentorship in your career. Again, I and many of the working group continue to have mentors well into our established academic careers, and mentorship will always be a part of your future academic career. With that, I would like to turn things over to Dr. Lee.
I have to unmute myself. Sorry about that. Good morning, everyone. I'm Rosa Lee. I'm the Senior Associate Dean for Curricular Affairs at Columbia University Vagelos College of Physicians and Surgeons, and a proud member of BenGAP. Just to continue from what Ray and Joel were describing, this is what I'm showing here is an example of one of our focus area competencies and milestones. This one pertains to the field of education, which was really, and actually for all of the focus areas, the sort of template ended up being pretty similar in terms of really turning that area of focus into really something from which a trainee could really build a trajectory, a career trajectory for advancement. So this is the example for education. This specific competency pertains to turning educational activities into scholarship, which we identified as really a key competency across all of the focus areas itself. And again, we sort of divided them out into milestones pertaining to beginner, intermediate, and advanced. And while they're not specific parallels, we sort of envision the beginner, those meeting the beginner milestones as medical students, whereas intermediate could be residents, and advanced leading to fellows, in that way. Recognizing though, as Joel even mentioned, there are some of these competencies where we as faculty or established faculty still feel very much at the beginner or novice level. So I'm going to discuss a little bit about how we then validated these competencies. So as Joel mentioned, this draft of competencies, the foundational plus the focus area competencies were created by members of our working group. And then we used a modified Delphi process to really then validate this. So in the Delphi process, we rely on reactor panels from the community to really give us feedback as to whether these whether these sort of pass muster as being appropriate and relevant for our aims. So we had two panels that we set up to receive as reactor panels. So one was the constituent panel, which we were going to rely on for feedback. So constituents included diverse trainees, really at this level of medical student, resident, fellow, or faculty in their first or second year of a faculty appointment. And so those were the members of our community that we identified and invited to join our constituent panel. The expert panel was used for feedback and validation, and our sort of criteria for expert panel was really someone who had a specific experience mentoring and advising diverse learners and trainees, and had experience in one or more of the areas of research, education, student affairs, faculty affairs, clinical leadership in departments, or work on their institutional academic appointment and promotions committees. And these were people who had a lot of experience with academic medicine in terms of sort of recognizing what variables really impacted success for individuals in advancing in academic medicine careers. So we invited both people who fit the constituent panel and expert panel to complete a survey. This was done online through a REDCap survey. And we received a total of 86 constituent panel respondents, as well as 60 expert panel respondents. And for those, some of you may have actually completed the survey. We thank you. We know it was a lengthy process going through each of the competency domains, specific milestones, asking for feedback on all of them. So we were really just so pleased with the level of response, and which we take as a level of support for this project and this work. We had, before releasing or deploying the survey, we set a threshold of 75% agreement, meaning that by the expert panel, meaning that for each competency, specific competency area, that we would need 75% of the respondents saying that they agreed or strongly agreed with the importance and the relevance of that specific competency to our aims. And if that was the case, then we deemed that to be valid and appropriate. And if it fell below that, then we would go back to the working group to discuss perhaps revise or perhaps remove. And if any of these categories received 75% agreement that they disagreement, so disagreed or strongly disagreed, then we would automatically remove those. In addition, we asked all of the constituent panel and expert panel survey respondents to really give us narrative feedback on the specific competencies and milestones. And we found that to be incredibly useful moving forward. So we deployed these surveys in the late summer in August and September of this year. And from our responses, we were actually pretty surprised at the high level of agreement overall with the competencies that were drafted by the group, as well, and the response by the expert and constituent panels. There were a few areas that did not meet this 75% threshold for validation that required further scrutiny or evaluation. So the first was within the domain 1 of academic career choice. And remember, there were specific competencies listed under each domain. So we ended up with a longer list. But one specific competency was determining a personal brand of importance to self and academic medicine. And the responses were less than 75% agree or strongly agree for this. Another area, a domain overall that did not meet the 75% agree or strong agree threshold was that of health policy, and that's in the focus domains. We didn't hit 75% for the sort of overall importance of the domain, and then specific competencies within the domain, and that data is listed here. So what did we do with that data? So we went back to our working group, looked at the specific responses, decided to keep all of the competency domains that hit the threshold of 75% or above, which was most of them. We used the feedback and we looked at the data for those that did not meet that threshold. And for some of them, we used the feedback to sort of reword them or to revise them. And then some of them we actually decided to remove based on the feedback from the reactor panel. So with this information, we have completed steps 1 and 2. So the working group has revised its initial draft of competencies. And I believe that it was just sent out for round 2 for final validation. So we are going back to the expert panel who had completed the first survey to show them the second revised set of competencies, and we'll ask them once again to rate them and to evaluate them for final validation. We expect to complete this survey and receive our data at the end of November, so that by December we can review the data, finalize our competencies, and then begin the exciting work of dissemination of our results. So again, I think there is a tremendous amount of work that went into this process, but it's been incredibly rewarding to see it through, to really feel like we're almost at the finish line. Again, we're excited to deploy our second round 2 of the reactor panel, to finalize our reports and then begin disseminating it. And then in terms of additional next steps, so we have also begun to apply for a second Josiah Macy Jr. Foundation grant, this time a board grant, which is really a multi-year grant to complete the work. So Joel showed us one of the slides, which really looked at the steps involved in competency-based medical education. And our work to date was really the first half of that, which was really identifying what are those abilities that are needed for trainees to succeed in establishing careers in academic medicine, and then actually articulating them into specific competencies. But obviously the important work is once you have identified those competencies, it's building out the educational activities, the experiences, and the assessments to both teach our trainees these skills so that they can acquire the competencies, and then to use the assessment so that the trainees can demonstrate that they've actually met them. And I think this is really important, and we really kept this in mind I work in curriculum and assessment, so I'm always thinking about assessments. But when you develop competencies, you really need to make sure that they are accessible. The whole purpose is that we're trying to achieve some outcome for our trainees. And so the assessments really help prove or demonstrate that they've met them. And I think we kept that in mind when we established the competencies. If you remember, many of them are very specific and concrete actions or skills or knowledge that can be acquired. And again, I think the more concrete they are, the more attainable they will be. So we really kept that in mind as we develop them. Again, so our next sort of step is to apply for a grant to really develop the educational activities that will support the teaching and acquisition of all of these specific milestones for our trainees. And then more exciting, I think that the most important part is really then developing tools for program evaluation. How will we know that we've actually met our goal? How will we know that that these competencies and all the educational activities around it, really the work of BenGap, quite honestly, is actually making a difference? So that's part of our plan, to really think about how we can create a sort of a dashboard or a tool for you as trainees to track your progress in meeting these competencies, to getting to your final goal, and also for us as an organization, for our partnering institutions, to really see how our trainees are progressing in meeting these competencies and the final desired outcome, which is really landing faculty appointments in academic medicine. So that's sort of the work to come. And with that, I want to thank you for your time and really open it up to questions.
Thank you so much for the presentation. This is McBib, and I have a question for Dr. Lee regarding it's a fantastic work that you're doing, first of all. And I have a little question regarding the survey and validation through, experts. Regarding the personal brand that you mentioned that did not reach, I'm assuming that is, personal identity and its kind of connection to their academic interests and careers, correct?
Yes, and it was funny. We had a really rich conversation about it, and what we found was, and again, this came out in a lot of the narrative comments that were submitted by the respondents, both in the constituent and expert panel. And we think it was more actually the branding of the competency itself. I think there was something about the term branding that was a bit off-putting, but when we sort of dug into what the intention was, it was really about sort of a personal vision, and really aligning that with a career in academic medicine. And so we decided, rather than throwing it out completely, to rename it and to reword it, and I think that the sort of revised specific competency that replaces the term personal branding will sort of resonate a little bit better. But again, we're going to send that out to our second round and see what the response is. But I think that was really interesting to kind of chew on for a bit. And Ray or Joel, if you have any other comments about that one, because that was a fascinating one for us.
Because there is, a lot around, personal identity formation and, like in the educational, in the curriculum itself. And so therefore, I thought that was what it was. And I was wondering whether there was like some narrative behind that you got beyond just, like the wording,
Yeah, so there was that, but it was also really, I think there was a second step in the branding part, which is really about first establishing your own personal professional identity, but then how do you express that to others? So we were thinking about sort of oftentimes, this idea of like the elevator pitch, like how do you kind of briefly summarize, your professional mission and your identity to others, which oftentimes really, can be very impactful when it comes to things like landing career, jobs. And advancing oneself professionally. So it was something about sort of developing that identity, but then being able to convey that effectively to the outside community that we really wanted to sort of get at. And I think that we're getting closer there with our new language.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would piggyback on what Rosa said, and it was, and I think it highlights the value of the narrative comments in a project like this. Another competency that Although it met the threshold of, validation with 75% agreement by the experts, there's a competency related to effective communication skills. And within that is the use of social media. And as you can imagine, there was all sorts of, freak narrative comments about, the good and the evil of social media. Again, an interesting thing to learn about from our community, and an opportunity to make sure that we were sort of portraying it or expressing it in a way that was really appropriate for this purpose.
Joel, did you want to add something?
No, I was just going to piggyback on the social media. I think part of it to be honest, reflects age differences. I think when we looked at our expert panels, there was a lot more negative comments about social media. When we looked at the constituent, it was a lot of favor and support of it. And so I think part of this is just understanding technology and new processes of communication and familiarity. So keeping that fine balance, and it'll be interesting to see. So I think we reworded and clarified the intent. It'll be interesting to see how the second round goes. I think you're on mute.
I was just going to ask a question. So can you share, all three of you have had and have core roles in integrating competencies and milestones. Given that the audience today are medical students, residents, fellows, senior leaders at the institutions, how do you foresee them moving forward these competencies and milestones in their institution through, the lens of faculty affairs or medical education? So we've designed them and we developed teaching materials, but then what should everyone on this call be thinking about as a next step to integration, application, moving the agenda forward?
So yeah, and again, there's the teaching materials, and I also want to bring in a comment I saw in the chat board about the assessments, right? Because I think that's where like the gold is. I think because the assessments will show the learners, will show the institutions that they're actually meeting the competencies, okay? And just quickly, someone asked, is there like a guideline for like assessment? So there's a very sort of popular framework, Miller's assessment pyramid of sort of knows how, shows how, and does, sort of about how you can actually, the types of assessment, So I would sort of say for those who are less familiar with it, to look at that first. It's a nice sort of intro to think about how you structure assessments. But I do think that once we have these educational activities and the assessments aligned, I think then it makes it very easy to incorporate it either within a curriculum or even outside a curriculum. I think there's a lot more sort of focus and interest on leadership skills development as part of the curriculum, certainly at the undergraduate medical education level, I think at GME as well. And I think a lot of these competencies that we're developing really fit into that framework very nicely. So I can almost see it as sort of like a grab and go. I mean, it's really like the purpose of these modules and the assessments creation is to make it easily usable at any institution. BenGAP has a really long history of success with this. For example, in the many med-ed portal submissions that we have, or entries that we have, where other institutions can just take this educational materials and the assessments and deliver it at their own home site. So I see that as sort of one way of doing it. I think certainly, we have a lot of important partnerships with affinity organizations at a national level. And I think that this is something that they can also use and implement with their own members. So I see a lot of opportunity there as well. So I would say sort of extracurricular or throughout sort of professional organizations, but also I think there's a lot of opportunity to build it within or to incorporate it within curriculum at institutions.
Can I make a point?
Yes.
When we talk about curriculum within institutions, I mean, I think we're all thinking very heavily with a UME lens, but, residents have come up a couple of times. What are we doing for residents? Residency programs are more atomized, they're harder to organize, and coming up with a curriculum that can be easily utilized by a program director, whether they have 90 residents or 3, I mean, they're very different resources that accrue to those directors. And so this is, I think, its utility, I think, has a particular usefulness in the GME space.
I agree. I also wanted to highlight something when we were thinking about kind of next steps and thinking about program evaluation, sort of hit upon this idea of having a dashboard that was actually very trainee centered. So maybe, and then we have a lot of, members of BNGAP, students, residents who are here, and this is not part of their program per se, but really something that they're doing, have found as individuals. And I think the idea of some of these activities being things that the learners themselves can individually sort of take and follow and track their performance through this dashboard was really exciting, in particular to the trainee members of our work group, to the current residents, to say, wow, I can sort of do this. I can take these at workshops at different BNGAP conferences, or maybe some of them are just things I can do independently, depending on how we deliver it, but then really track my own performance and say, okay, so like I need to get more skills or do more in networking and learn more about that, and really identify areas, some of these competency domains where they want to get more training and more experience. So I think it can be really useful, and put that sort of in the trainees, make the trainee like sort of the locus of control, rather than waiting to receive this education from their institution as well.
Yeah, and Dana, I want to piggyback on what you said. I think this is actually very doable at the GME level. If you look at the literature of other non-clinical longitudinal things that residency programs do, for example, residence as teachers programs, many places have written about their leadership development program for residents. I think a pre-faculty program for resident that's sort of deliberate and modular based is something that can be done either at the program level, or many institutions now, I think, have sort of a combined GME conference where they have residents from multiple programs that come together for a single curriculum, like around patient safety or something like that. I think for institutions that are committed, this is very translatable to those sorts of things.
Yeah, I would just add, I think the beauty of developing these competencies first, certainly they make the groundwork for educational activity, but it also provides a roadmap for those GME programs or academic institutions that may want to create their own educational opportunities. I think we forget to overlook the basic problem is there was just an overall shortage of academic faculty, particularly diverse. And I think this is one time that probably medicine all agrees we need to develop more diverse faculty, and there will be many ways to do that. So I think the competencies will assist that. I think the other thing that BNGAP has a very strong history of developing multimodal educational training opportunities for medical students and fellows and residents that have been successful in the past. And so I think the educational activities will build upon those previous activities. And we will invite fellows, residents, various faculty and individuals to help develop the future materials so that we know they will be available and of value to students in various educational formats.
The other perspective we could have that relates to, Rosa, what you mentioned, that some of us are even still novices, maybe in some areas we could look at a few of the competencies and said, oh, I never got all that good at that. But especially for those of you who are here as students or residents, you're earlier in your careers, you don't have to achieve every competence, level of competence, even in your stage of development right away, again, and that the idea that you have those areas of focus so that individuals can work on areas that are particularly important to them. So I think all of this would give us an increased sense of confidence and self-efficacy as individuals make progress, even though maybe their school hasn't yet adopted an approach to it, or their program hasn't. And even the leadership that's inherent in this set of competencies might help learners and junior faculty advocate for such programs within their institutions.
I think you're making a really important point, Janet. I mean, I don't think that the onus can always be on the learner. The institutions need to meet them where they are and give them that support. And if it doesn't exist, at least this project helps point out to these learners where there are gaps in the support that they're receiving in their professional and personal development. And, hope that the institutions will also see that as a little bit of a scorecard for themselves.
I agree to that point. And one of the things I wanted to mention, in alignment to that is providing some, alignments to define, some competencies with ACGME and LCME might be, a good idea to encourage, institutions to adopt those things quickly. So that might be, just to draw the lines in principle to some of the things that are being wonderfully developed.
Nolan?
Yeah, thank you. One thought was that how do we improve competencies amongst faculty? That's a challenge. And I am on some ACGME workshops or whatever. I think folks are working in that space. Some people on this call perhaps are on that in that group. Or if you want to be involved, let me know. I'll put my email in the chat. Thank you.
I mean, I think you're making an excellent point, Nolan. And I think just in building off of what you shared, and for Joel, Rosa, and Ray, how did we go about in considering the titles for each column? I think that was a big discussion. Different groups have taken different approaches. Like some people have said, these are the competencies for people entering into medical school. These are the competencies for people entering residency. And these are the competencies for faculty. Can you share a little bit more about our approach with the label of each column and why? And then I think particularly Joel, given that we've been working so closely with the osteopathic schools, I think it's really important for the group to hear how we are. It's not only an allopathic thing, but that we are really making sure that we embrace and align with the osteopathic medical schools.
I'll start with the first one. We started with, labeling our columns, medical student, resident, fellow / junior faculty. And as we talked through this at the working group, people enter the trajectory towards a career in academic medicine at different times. And so somebody may complete medical school, be halfway through residency, realize that they really love teaching and getting involved in a research project in residency, and only then realize that an academic career may be right for them. And so, and it's okay for them to be at the beginner level, even though they're a resident. And if we sort of named it a medical student competency, yet they're a resident, it may not resonate with them. So we chose, we're purposeful to do sort of beginner, intermediate, and advanced, to really give homage to the fact that people enter these stages at different points that don't line up with their exact title in the continuum of training. The same is true for junior faculty who are thinking about the early stage of their career, who may not have really had much guidance or mentorship and learning in some of these competency areas. And it would give them the ability to decide, I'm still a novice in the competency area of networking, even though I've got my first competency job or first academic job, and give them sort of a set of competency and milestones to work towards, even though they're already a faculty member.
From the osteopathic perspective, when I went through training 30 plus years ago, about 1 in 10 students was an osteopathic student. The focus for most osteopathic training was primary care and clinical practice, and not a lot of emphasis on academic medicine. But I think that's changed a lot in the last couple of decades, particularly with the growth in medical schools. Now 1 in 4 students is a DO, and the need to have academic osteopathic faculty as along with allopathic faculty is greater now than it ever has been in history. So I think, we've purposely tried to engage osteopathic physicians and help fill that void. The second comment I'll make, which was, and we've talked about it, was when we set up the milestones, we understood it's not just individuals that maybe a student, resident, or fellow in an academic medicine, but we're seeing an increasing number of physicians entering academic medicine as a second career or an additional career. And that's a wonderful entry point. But again, I think when we develop these milestones, they present, so as has been mentioned, some guidance and challenges for even the established physicians. So I think we intently made these milestones. They can help any faculty along their educational journey and become a better academic faculty.
I think, Joe, you've also verbalized quite a bit. As schools are struggling to recruit faculty, how do we engage more community practitioners? And I just want to reiterate something that you said, because I know you always bring this up when we talk. Are we going to create a seminar for community physicians? Because community physicians who've been in practice in rural areas are pre-faculty, right? We've historically framed pre-faculty as college medical student resident. But I know even in the University of New Mexico, we are struggling to recruit enough preceptors in rural areas. And as we engage them, after they graduated 20 years after medical school, what is that training we need to provide? So I think, I just want to highlight what you've called us to do in expanding the definition of pre-faculty, and how that might be another group to show these competencies and milestones to, and think about what those teaching materials would be like. So.
Yeah, I just to follow up, there's been an increasing emphasis in community-based education and residency and medical students outside of a large academic center. And the intent is that students may have no access at all to a rural or underserved site. And if they don't know those sites exist, they're not going to relocate there. So I think it's been very purposeful. But as you said, now we have to provide some training for those community-based preceptors so that they can help build the skill set in those students.
So we encourage all the hard questions. The group will be submitting a follow-up grant to Josiah Macy Junior Foundation to apply for additional funds to evolve teaching materials. And so we appreciate any hard questions to make sure that we make the grant application as strong as possible and continue this important relationship with Josiah Macy Junior Foundation. Any other questions from the students, residents, fellows, junior faculty, senior faculty?
Hello, my name is Alessandra Jimenez, and I'm actually from Texas, so the Rio Grande Valley down in Texas, and we're a pretty new institution down here. And my question actually has to do with the makeup of the Delphi group, and I was wondering if you could go to a slide that provides that information again. Just because I noted that you mentioned experts, right? Experts in these fields, but the end user, right, if you will, for all this information would end up being students and like experiencing medical education. I'm wondering if they were included in your competency questions.
I'll take a start, and then maybe if Rosa, you or anyone else wants to finish up. So we had two reactor panels, and the constituent panel was made up of medical students, residents, and fellows who were themselves diverse, and who we felt were going to be as you said, the end users or recipients of this project. And we felt it was really important to engage these constituents because it had to pass the test for them as well, for you as well, to be something that resonates with you, that's realistic, that's potentially achievable, and consistent with what your lived experience is as a diverse trainee. Nevertheless, the folks in this group, by definition, are still learners and have not yet made it to academic medicine. So we had a second panel called the expert panel, and we not only got feedback, but this was the panel we used to validate, because these are people who truly had the experience of mentoring diverse students and residents into their first academic career. So they've seen what works and what doesn't work for these groups. So we used the ratings from the experts as sort of our validation of the competencies, but we took the advice and input from both who we call the experts and the constituents to make sure that the work product was going to be, relevant and actionable.
Thank you so much.
So, and then Alessandra, your question's a great one. As I was sort of reviewing the slides one last time before presenting, I said, oh no, we should have included a slide showing the demographic data. We did ask for the identity data of both the constituent panels and the expert panels. I think we were really, and let me take a step back and said, even when we created the work group, we really wanted to ensure diversity and really sort of representation of as many of our stakeholders as possible. So we did ask about, how the respondents identified, racially, ethnically, gender identity, their, sort of positions and whatnot. So I'm sorry that I don't have that, but I think that, actually, let me see if I can share. I'm happy to share this one. I'll share what I've got. This is from, and it's not in a slide. I had to pull it out of a Word document, but this is from our constituent panels in our final report. So this was a sort of racial breakup by how our respondents identified. So 3.5% American Indian, Alaska Native, 26% Asian, 29% Black, African American, 17% Latinx, 1.2% Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, almost 35% white, and some others. So we really sort of did keep an eye on that and certainly wanted to at least collect this information.
I will add too, there was a significant concordance between the constituent group and the expert panel. The major differences between were the milestones. What should be considered a beginner or advanced. For example, when we were talking about social networks, the constituent group thought that's a beginner level, whereas it was pushed in the advanced from the expert group. So it was really a difference in where the milestone, there was the disagreement. But as far as agreement on the domains and the major competencies, it was very, very similar. No significant difference between the two. So I think that helped validate, as Ray was saying, that I think helped validate that the experts were reflecting what they expect from learners, but also that the learners and experts had true concordance.
I think also what I'll add to this discussion is that managing expectations in a bidirectional fashion is critical. Because when I reflect on the integration of a couple of things, LGBT content in the curriculum, there were certain expectations by students that unfortunately were going to be hard to be implemented by schools from the sheer fact that for decades, LGBT content wasn't integrated. There were generations of current faculty that were never taught about that community, but it was actually taboo to bring up conversations on gay and lesbian health in the classroom was to be labeled, to be ostracized, to carry a scarlet A letter. And so in reflecting on that experience and thinking about how students wanted more, there was a very quick call from society for physicians to be better trained. But there always has to be a realization of a ramp up period for schools to meet that goal. And I think that sometimes when we roll out competencies and milestones, we don't take a moment to reflect on the journey to this point or that phase of ramp up. And without that, it could be a setup for failure because the students want our faculty to be immediate experts. And I get it. I completely understand. But I think we do a disservice by not explaining to our learners and even to our faculty what it takes to design, implement, evaluate, how this is a growing phase for everyone. And I think that's why it was really important. I mentioned the LGBT example, but I think that the recent AAMC DI competencies and milestones are also dealing with that because as structured, they associate faculty with being experts already in the third column. And so at my own institution, my faculty are turning to me and saying, I'm going to be a failure. Why would I want to teach this? Based on this document, I'm supposed to be an expert in all of these competencies and milestones. I was never trained. I was never trained as a medical student or resident to do this. And what do I do now? And they're scared. They're scared to step in and step forward to lead this work. And so I do think, hopefully we've learned from both of those experiences. And as we take this on, that we consider that, right? And we nurture the growth and development in appropriately. Otherwise, we won't reach the ultimate goal of preparing everyone. Right. So just want to share that reflection. And I see a couple of head nods if anyone else wants to comment on that, but I think that's a real challenge whenever you sit with a dean of education and they're like, we're already struggling, our faculty feel overwhelmed. Now you want them to do something they were never trained or prepared to do. But Med portal format, I think, can help address that, right? to just connect the dots, because I think the Med portal format, and what I mean by a format, when you download materials from Med portal, a core component that's required in any publication in Med portal is a facilitator guide, and often complete comprehensive facilitator guides are often not disseminated when doing faculty development. And that just puts faculty members or residents or fellows or even medical student peer teachers at a disadvantage because they may not fully understand the material that they're teaching in a stepward process. So I'm going to stop there. We are at 11:16. We caught up really well and now we're 1 minute behind. But just any final thoughts or comments before we set up for the breakouts? Any final thoughts or comments? Great. So please remember to complete the pre-assessment. The pre-assessment is different from the JOT form. I'm just going to pull it up again because there were a couple of questions in the chat box about what the pre-assessment looks like. Let me show it to you once again. This is the email that you should have received, really critical as we go into the next segment with our fellows. So please complete the pre-assessment to provide them with evaluation data. You just click on this. Do not forward it to your friends. This is linked to your email. We will start at the half hour. Remember, we're going into breakout sessions. So, click the Zoom link, and maybe Nicholas, you could pull up the agenda once again so people know what are the 3 sessions.
Sure. So as you can see on the agenda here, starting at 11:30, the 3 separate Zoom links are available by just hovering and clicking on the link next to the session you wish to attend. Again, please complete the pre-evaluation or pre-assessment survey that was sent to your email. If you have any difficulties accessing any of these Zoom rooms, please don't hesitate to send me an email. We can figure it out. We ask the speakers to be in the rooms at least 10 minutes ahead of time just to prepare.
Thank you, Nicholas. Thanks. So please remember to break out into the groups. You're welcome to stay here or go to one of the other breakout sessions. Really important for our fellows. Once again, thank you, Dr. Lee, Dr. Dickerman, and Dr. Lucas. Excellent work.